Welcome to week 2. It is lecture 2, and we are going to be talking about relationships today, which is a really fun thing. Let me share my screen for you. Now you guys can see it. There we go. It's a fairly light day. Now, I know you might be asking, why is it light? We've had a couple light days, and that's true. We have had a couple light days, but the whole point is we're starting to build some pieces for us to start understanding Django. Next week, we will begin Django. And that is where we are going to spend the rest of our time. The rest of our time is going to be building full stack applications. So yes, it is a little bit easier today. That way you can get the fundamentals. And then we are really just diving full, just kind of head first into all of this information. Today, like I said, will be a little bit lighter, but moving forward, our lectures are going to be a little bit more complex, a little bit longer. And so that's why we try to balance that as well. Just before we get started, a couple housekeeping things. As a reminder, your discussion posts are due by Sunday. You need 2 out of the 3. I sent you an email Monday about that, but just as a reminder, you need 2 out of the 3 every week. You don't get extra credit if you do 3. So you just need 2. So make sure you do have that, or else you can fall into academic probation. And we want to make sure that that does not happen, because that's not a fun thing for you nor I. Cool. And again, talking about your core assignments. Now we are going to be talking about MySQL today, but your core assignments, if I were to look at them, are, I'm gonna actually pull this up. Here's our class schedule. If you have any questions, I know somebody did ask where the office hours go. I just put the link here on the office hours. This first one was an introduction, and then there wasn't much at the beginning that we talked about for today's office hour, but I will still put just kind of the walkthrough for that here at this 4 o'clock hour. But for our assignment checklist, just as a reminder, you do have 2 core assignments this week. Bank account and users with bank accounts. Now, one thing I do want to say, and really want to reiterate, is I've noticed, especially when I went back and saw who completed what assignments, that a lot of students just did the core assignments. And I will promise you this, if you just do the core assignments, you're not going to get the most out of this program. Do the practice assignments. I mean, this week is fairly light. It's probably the lightest week that we have. All you have are these user and chaining methods. We went over chaining methods. We went over user. But you have that. So do those practice assignments and submit them. Post them to GitHub. It will look like you are doing what you are, but you're doing more work on GitHub. You're showing that you're coding more frequently. This is great for recruiters. This is great for you. And it is practiced for you to fully understand these topics. In order to get a job, you need an understanding, not just like, I kind of know what that is, but you actually need to know what a chaining method is and how you will use those. So make sure that you don't just forget about the practice assignments, and not even including the optional. The optional are great. I think you really should. I would encourage you to try to do as many as you can, not just core and practice, but even do as many as you can in the optional section, because that will be crucial, just especially if you want to go for a black belt. They'll absolutely be crucial that you do most of the optional, like singly linked lists and doubly linked lists. That's not going to do anything with the black belt. That's great to know. Really good thing to know for getting a job. But all I want to say is please don't just, okay, I only have 2 assignments this week. No, I would encourage you to think about it in a way of, I have 4 assignments this week, 2 that are crucial that I turn in, but that you have 4 assignments this week. So really want to reiterate that. Don't just skip the practice, because it will hurt you in the end. At the end of the day, you are paying a lot of money. So don't short yourself, right? Like, do the best that you can and take the most out of it as you can. Perfect. So this week, again, the core assignments are bank account and users with bank accounts. Awesome. Well, today, what we're actually going to be talking about is MySQL. Now, there's a few things I want to really hit before we get started. When it comes to MySQL, let me cancel this. When it comes to MySQL, do not worry about downloading it if you're having issues. If you download it and all is well, great, awesome. That's a great thing to do and download it and that's awesome. But it's not necessary for your assignments. You can do your assignments the same way that I'm going to teach today. I'm actually not going to be in VS Code. I'm actually going to be on a whiteboard. And if you do that, send me a screenshot. Great. That works perfect for me. It's just really helping you understand the relationships between our different models. So for MySQL, if you are trying to download it and it's not working and you can't figure out the pathway or anything like that, don't worry about it. Don't stress. Don't spend hours and hours. Read the material on the platform, do the assignments the way that I'm going to teach today. You can do the same things. And then don't stress about it. I promise you, do not stress about downloading and having that downloaded. You're not going to need it for Django. It's just a great thing to know and understand. If you move on to Java, then yes, you're going to need MySQL, but we can get there. Secondly, what I really want to reiterate is for this entire MySQL section, there's really 4 things I want you to focus on. Because one thing to know is SQL is its own language. Writing SQL code is its own language. In the same way that Python and Java are their own language, it is its own thing. There are people who get paid to write SQL code. So I want you to only focus on really 4 things. Now, if you have time this week, obviously go through it because it helps you understand databases better, et cetera, et cetera. Will make you a better developer. But if you are stressed about this, I just want you to focus on 4 things because these are going to be crucial for your understanding of the Django web framework and what we're going to be doing in our full stack application. Those 4 are database design, one-to-many, or one-to-one, sorry, one-to-many, and many-to-many. These 4 things. Database design is important for just understanding what a database relationship is, just kind of understanding why we use a database, which we're going to talk about today, right? But database design is important to know and understand. One-to-many is a type of relationship, as is one-to-many and many-to-many. We're going to talk about these 3 today as well. Now, normalization is something that a lot of students can really get stuck up on, and I'm encouraging you to not. Again, I encourage you to read information and I encourage you to soak in as much as you can. But if it's creating the space where you're like, I'm going to fail as a developer, that's absolutely not true. Normalization is a great thing to have, but it's not necessary, especially for what we're doing in Django. We are introducing MySQL, but we will be using SQLite, which operates the same way. It comes with Django. So do not stress about like normalization. Do not stress about MySQL query left joins. Those are difficult. Those are hard. So this other section I'm going to deem as optional. You don't need to know this. Again, great thing to know, great thing to understand, but absolutely optional. And for every assignment that you have, so your 2 core, I did go through and all of your core assignments have this parentheses core on them. For dojos and ninjas and user dashboard, you can create what we call an ERD. You can create it in the same way that I'm going to create one today. So again, don't stress about having MySQL downloaded or the workbench or any of that nature. All you really need to focus on is understanding relationships of one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. Perfect. Any questions on MySQL before we kind of jump in? Okay. So before we jump in, I do want to reiterate that SQL is a very, very powerful and popular database language and just database. Right? A SQL database is wildly popular. And you might see that there's different types of SQL databases. There's Postgres, there's GraphQL, MySQL. There's a ton of different ones that all operate off of that SQL language, but they act in a different way. But at the root, they are what we call a relational database. Now, does anybody know what a relational database is? Anybody want to take a stab at what a relational database is?
They're related.
They're related. Yeah. No, I mean, that sounds silly, but what do you mean by that?
They depend to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe not necessarily depend, but a relational database is a way that we can store data. And the way that we say, okay, this data is connected with this data is we create what we call a relationship. Right? There are other types of databases like a non-relational database. So if you work with MERN, the MERN stack, you will be using one called MongoDB, which is what we call a non-relational database. But here, MySQL and SQL is a relational database. It creates tables in our database. That's the main way that it does it. It creates what we call tables, which we're going to talk about here in just a second, as a way to store our data, and those tables will have different indicators of how they are connected to one another. So we will be focusing on a relational database. Now, Java uses a relational database. You can. And Python are both relational databases. MERN is the only one that is a non-relational database. So just knowing SQL is a relational database, and it stores things in tables, and it communicates how things are related via what we call foreign keys, but we're going to get to that in just a second. Well,
so Will,
yeah.
So are these databases considered standard relational databases, or what's the difference between a standard and a predefined?
A standard and a predefined. I've never heard of a predefined. Can you elaborate on your question?
So I was just
or where you found that?
I was just looking at relational databases, and it uses the terms predefined data relationships, and then it also in another section says popular examples of standard relational databases include Microsoft and SQL Server, Oracle database, etc. But I was just curious, the predefined kind of caught me. I'm like, well, what is that? I figured you might know.
So I think you're thinking, because I think we're thinking of the same thing, unless you want to send me that, because the idea behind a relational database is you can predefine your model. And decide, okay, my user has a name, right? My user has an email. You will predefine that before a user is even created. But I'm not, unless you want to send me that and then I can look at it. I've not heard of the difference between a standard and a predefined in the sense of that they're different, if that makes sense.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. I think that is one of the benefits of a relational database is it is predefined.
That would make sense. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was like, what? I'm confused. Yeah. Yeah. So with a relational database, we will set up, and we're going to look at it right now. We're going to set up a model. Remember how we had a user, right? And our user is going to have a name. And whenever we did classes, we said, okay, self.name equals whatever the name was passed through or whatever. We did dogs. We're going to set up now what we call a model. And we're going to predefine the information known, saying, okay, all of my users are going to have blank, a name, an email, a social security number, something of that nature. So we will predefine that information there. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything on that, but if you want to send me that link, I would be happy to look at that and walk through that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to stop sharing real quick, and I'm going to do I guess I could have done a new share. But I want to share my whiteboard. Okay, can you guys see that? All right. Perfect. Okay, you guys can see it. Awesome. Now, let's go ahead and instructor Zach does one kind of thing for databases that I really enjoy. So we're going to build it out as well. And we're going to build just a light version of Facebook. The reason I like to use this one along with Zach is because it just really helps you reiterate and understand the different types of relationships. So when you, oh, that's the wrong thing. Oops, sorry. When you create a profile on Facebook, I don't know why this square is not working. When you create a profile on Facebook, what happens? Does anybody know? Like, what do you, in order to go into Facebook, what do you have to do?
Make a user and
Yeah.
put your name and information. Fill out
Yeah.
a
So
form.
how do we do that? So we fill out some sort of information, right? And like you said, let's do a user. So if I just type a user here. Perfect. What sort of information do we have to type in whenever we create an account?
Name, email ID,
Name, yeah. So like maybe like first
gender,
name. I like that idea. Last name. Date of birth, yeah. Love that. Email, gender, password. Yeah, all of these are great. And then yeah, maybe a username. Great. So when we create our user, we have to put in all this information. And what Facebook does is it has this database that stores all that information. And now that information doesn't vary, right? It's not like I get, when I fill out the form to create a Facebook, I don't see anything different than maybe Mel, right? It's not going to ask me, am I a dog person or a cat person, and ask Mel, like, have you ever eaten snails before, right? That's not different information they're saving in a database. It all is the same thing. Every user in Facebook has to put a first name and a last name. They have to put a date of birth, an email, a gender, a password, and a username, something of that nature, right? And so in our database, we are going to create what we call a model. Now, this model right here, let me type this, or this user is what we call our model. Now, it kind of looks like the class that we just created, right? And so it's got this model of user. Basically, this is our template of what all of our users' information is going to be. And we're going to call this user. Now, notice that it is singular. So it is not a plural here, but it is a model. So every user that comes onto our Facebook has to have all of this information. Does anybody know what these are called? The first name, the last name, the date of birth, email, all that stuff. Anybody know what those are called? Yeah, John, attributes. So these are called my attributes of my model. So your model can have one attribute. It can have 20 attributes. These are just the things that each model must have, right? If we're going to replicate a user, if we're going to, press our printing machine and get a bunch of users, we want to make sure that we can have all the same information. That way we have good data. They are all the same, right? We have all of the users' first name, all the users' last name, date of birth, email, right? So whenever we want to sell their information to add people, they can, here's their email, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this model is missing three things. Let's think about it this way. Let's say we create Facebook. And I go and I sign up and I say, okay, my name is Will Calhoun. I go, I sign up. Perfect. It takes me to Will Calhoun's dashboard or my site, right? Now let's say quickly, maybe 20 minutes later, another Will Calhoun goes, creates a profile. How would my computer know which Will is which? How would it know to take me to my profile and not the other Will Calhoun? Well, notice that I can't do a first name or last name, right? I might even have the same birthday. Crazier things have happened. But Bennett is correct. Every single time in our database, we will have something called an ID. This ID, I like to say, you can kind of think about it as like a social security number. All right. In the US, we have social security numbers. What this does is it allows us to say people can have all the same names, but this is your unique number. When it comes to taxes, when it comes to getting a loan, all of this stuff, it's a way that they can identify which Will Calhoun is which. The ID acts the same way. In our database, it is going to be what we call our unique identifier. Every user might even say something like first name, they might have the same first name and last name, but they will have a different ID number. So that way we know which user is which. In this MySQL, the way that it will work is it's something that we don't have to write. All these other attributes we do create ourselves. But what's great about MySQL is it will actually write that for us. It will create that for us. So our first user will get the ID of 1. Now it uses a number. Other databases might use something like a hash. So like if you go to your non-relational database, it will be a hashed number. So it'll have meaning that it has a mix of numbers and letters and all kinds of different stuff. MySQL is just a number. So if my first user creates an account, they will have an ID of 1. Obviously, somebody else comes, they're going to have an ID of 2, 3, 4, blah, 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 blah. One thing to really, really know. Let's say I'm the first user of Facebook ever. I go, my ID is 1. Then 1 million people download Facebook and I decide actually Facebook's super toxic. I don't want this. I want it to be deleted. And I go and I delete my Facebook. One thing to note is although I've deleted my instance of my user, right? I've deleted my account. That ID of 1 will never be refilled. That's it. That ID of 1 is done. So the 1 millionth and 1 person is not going to now have the ID of 1. It just, once it's deleted, it's done with. The reason for that is they have to be able to prove that they actually deleted your data and information. That's one of the big reasons. But once you decide, okay, I'm done with this, MySQL as a database will not go and backfill your ID number. It just is what it is. That is your number and nobody else will have that at all. Yes. And it just keeps counting up. That's how this works. Now, when I said that we create this first name, this last name, this date of birth, email, gender, password, username, right? We create all those attributes. Like I said, it can be as little as 1 and as many as, whatever. There's 2 other ones that are necessary for my model. Does anybody know what they are? Bennett's really been into databases, so he's been crushing it. So he's exactly right. We have our created app and we have our updated app. Now, these ones you do have to create. So for that ID, it is automatically created for you. You don't have to do anything about that. But for these ones, you do have to do this created app and updated app. One of the big portions is this created app is a great way for companies to tout to their investors, right? And say, we just had 1 million in the last month that was created, right? Something of that nature. Updated app is again, just a way to track, when something was last updated. You might have received some sort of email saying, hey, your password hasn't been updated in the last 6 months. That's a security threat or whatever. Let's go ahead and change that. Well, they're going off of this updated at date. They're saying, hey, if this date is actually longer than 6 months, let's go ahead and send them an email and say, hey, it's been the same password for a long time. Let's go ahead and change that. In the same way, whenever and we're going to look at Facebook, like when you create a post and it says what time you did that post, they're just taking the created at time, the created at date and the created at time. So this created at and updated at are 2 things that you will add to every model. So just get this in your head now. When you are creating your models, always make sure you have a created app and an updated app. John asked, would it make sense to have an active /deleted/archived field? Not necessarily. No, I would say no. Not in your model. If you're talking like a Boolean field or just, which of the three is that, I would say no. It would not make sense of that. Cool. Now, we have our user. Perfect. Now on Facebook, let's take it way back. Back before you could like go on Facebook Marketplace or do TV or whatever they do now. But really at the beginning of Facebook, you would create posts, right? That was the beginning of Facebook for the people, who really know. You create a post. So let's create a post. Here, let me move that little guy. Perfect. Now, with my post, what does, just from a simplistic standpoint, what does a post consist of? Yeah. So the text, right? So some sort of text, like the actual post itself. Maybe a title. I like that. I'm going to call that. Do this text. Title. I'm not going to do a picture because a picture is what we're going to do for a one-to-one. And that would actually be its own thing in the database. But right now, let's go ahead and say, yeah, maybe an emoji. That might be part of text, but let's just put it here anyway. Okay. So we're here. I love all of the stuff also, guys. Way to go. Now we're missing a couple things. If I were to, Nathan had it dead on. There's a couple things we do need to add. What are they? Yep. You're created at and you're updated at. What is it automatically going to build for me? Anybody remember? Well, that's the timestamp. It's going to build
ID.
an ID. Yeah. It's going to build my ID for me. So from here, it's going to build my ID. But what is a crucial piece that we are missing here? We're thinking through a post. Let's just say a post in itself is existing. What has to happen? Not submit. Nathan, you're on the right track.
Establish a relationship between the user and the post.
Well, yeah, we have to have who posted this, right? This post lives in our database, but we have to have who posted this. Now, that is what we call our foreign key. So here, I'm going to put this. This will be something like this, user ID. Now, the way this works is this is the relationship with my user and my post. My post exists because a user created it. My post has a text, a title, maybe an emoji, has a created at and updated at. My database will generate an ID for me, but we know that a user has to be the one who actually generates a post, right? Posters don't generate themselves. A user has to generate this post. And so that is where this comes in. This is what we call in a MySQL database. This is what we call our foreign one thing to note is your IDs are called, one second, I'm trying to keep the same colors. They're called primary key. So that's not at all the same color. So your ID of your actual instance of user or actual instance of post is called your primary key. And then the attribute that connects one model to another is what we call our foreign key. Now, we have three different types of relationships. We have our one-to-many, our many-to-many, and our one-to-one. So if we think critically here, for this post, one post can have how many users who created it? One, right? One post has one user. Okay. One user can have how many posts? Can they only have one post ever? They can have many, right? Many posts. So one post can only have one user. So from the post side, only one user ID can be there. Now, from the user side, a user can have many posts. So that is what we call our one-to-many relationship. And this is how it's built out in MySQL. This is how you would build if you had like the MySQL workbench, you might see it this way. It has a little bit of a user pitchfork. Somebody asked the question, doesn't user ID and foreign key also need to be in user? No. One thing I do really want to point out, and this is crucial, so thanks for pointing this out. This right here is going to be the same number as this right here. This user ID is just pulling whatever the user who posted it, it's pulling their ID. That's what actually connects the two. It's saying the ID of the user ID is the way that we can indicate which user in my database made this post. So this user ID refers to the primary key of the user. Okay. So back to this guy. It looks a little bit like a pitchfork, right? The way we think about it is this. The way I kind of think about it is if you turn your head, this looks like an M, right? And that's like, oh, mini. This pitchfork side is on the mini side of my relationship. Meaning, I can have more than one post. But if you look at it and you kind of think about it as, you know, them, let's say they're sending information back and forth, something like that, the models. One user can go and they can have post A, post B, post C. This is just a conceptual way to think about it. But if you're coming from the post side, post A, post B, post C, all converge to one user. So from a one-to-many side, this is how it looks. This is how we build it out. If you're in the MySQL workbench, if you decide to do your assignments there, you will see that there is this little guy of like that looks like a pitchfork, and that it says that way you know that the pitchfork side is on the mini side, and then the singular line is on the one side. Does that make sense? So somebody said quite a few questions. I love all the questions. Perfect. Somebody asked, oh, Mark's already answering for me. So the primary key and the foreign key are basically the same. Yes and no. They are the same in the sense of it is an identifier for my user, but my foreign key is my connection between my two models. My primary key exists so I can identify which of my models I'm talking about. If I'm talking about Will Calhoun's profile, I have an ID number somehow in Facebook's, whatever that is unique to me. This foreign key is something that exists on posts that allows the post model to connect to my unique user so I know exactly which user posted this post. Somebody asked, if it's many to many, do we have a foreign key in both models? Well, I'm actually going to show you that here in just a second. Great question though, Tiana. Yes, you will have a foreign key, but what a many-to-many will actually do is it will create a third table, which we're going to look at here in just a second. Marcus, in just this instance, right, the foreign key could be something else if that's what connects the two tables. Maybe explain your question. Your foreign key is what will connect two tables together. So these two models are linked together by the foreign key. Yes. The foreign key is what links them two together.
Yeah, I was just saying that the foreign key it doesn't necessarily have to be the primary key from another table, or rather I was asking that, right? So in this case, if the thing that connected post to user was email or something, could email be the foreign key in post, or does
No.
it have?
No, so the way that this will work is it will be the ID because that is the most unique thing. Now, obviously we could set up a program to where, two people couldn't have the same email, but when we go to databases, the thing that is like, you can think about it from the US government standpoint, right? They don't use my email to do my taxes. Even though I'm the only one who technically has that email, they don't use that to do my taxes. They use my social security number. So when you work with databases, it is going to be the primary key. That is the only thing that we rely on as the unique identifier for a model.
So every time a foreign key in one table will be the primary key in another.
The thing
The
that
one that you're
connects it.
connected to.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Because that's the only thing we rely on that is unique. That is, again, I bring up because I think it's just a great example of a social security number, right? That is the one thing the US government relies on to tell citizens apart. Not name, not address, not anything like that. It is the social security number. It's the same way when it gets to our, when we are talking about models. Now, let's say that we wanted to create a like. Say, okay, now we want to create a like. Well, what is going to happen there? Let's say, I don't know what color. Let's just do black, I guess. It's kind of lame, but no, we'll do the other color. So if I create a like here, a couple things are going to happen. Now, my like is going to have what 3 things that all my models have? What are my 3 things? Yep. ID. It's going to have a created at and an updated at. Now, updated at is kind of weird for a like, but I guess you can unlike and then relike something like on Instagram if you accidentally are creeping on somebody's profile, for sure. But there's a couple things that are going to happen here. And this is going to be the beginning of our many-to-many relationship. So the way that this will work, let's say I post something and Mel wants to go and like it. If we're thinking about from a database, if we're storing the information, what is happening? Well, I have a user that is liking a post, right? Let's say Mel is my user and she's liking my post. What is a way that I could connect the two? What do you think will happen here? Foreign key. Specifically, what do I need to do? Yeah, Jordan, you're on the very much so on the right path. I need to know which post that is being liked. How would I do that? What's my unique thing? I have something like a post ID. Then I'm also going to have the user who liked my post. I'm gonna call it user ID. So this is creating this third table for like that keeps track of which user liked it and which post they liked. Now, keeping track and realizing that this guy That's terrible. Sorry. This guy and this guy are the same. And this guy and this guy must be the same. Meaning it is taking my unique identifier of whatever user likes this post. And it's taking the unique identifier of what post they liked, and it's creating this third table called liked. Now, if we think about it, can a user only like one post? No, right? A user can like many posts. So over here. And then can a post only have one like? The answer to that question, as we know, is no. Or else influencers would not be a thing. So what this does is this creates what we call our many-to-many table. So where many users, and this is not, I guess, let's think about it not from a one post perspective, but we're thinking from a general view as we are building our database. A user can like many posts, and a post can be liked by many users. That is our many-to-many relationship. With a many-to-many relationship, it will create this third table always. In this case, it's called like, but it will create this third table that hosts the post ID and the user ID. That way we can connect the two together. Any questions on that? Any questions on that? So if we're thinking from we're building up this website, this application, and we're thinking of, okay, well, I want to have this like feature, and I need a post that will, you know, a user can like many posts. You can like just not just one per time. I did have a friend who didn't believe in favoriting more than one tweet in his life. So if he did favorite a tweet, he would go back and unfavorite the other one and then favorite, which, you know, I still resent him to this day for that. But if we're building our application, that's not how it works. One user can like many posts. One post can be liked by many users. That creates our many-to-many relationship. With a many-to-many relationship, it will create this third table. And that third table will host the ID of both models that are being connected many-to-many wise. I love the influencers. I should not have said that, but I love it. Just go straight at intra workouts. Love it, Kevin. Any questions on the many-to-many idea? Many-to-many will always create a third table that has the ID and information of my user and my post. Now, when we actually build out our models, Django will do this for us. But the idea is just so that you can understand how this works. So if we type this out, so many or one post liked by many users, one user likes many posts. Hence our many-to-many relationship. Mark asks, so many-to-many is always connected to two or more tables then? Yes, right? A many-to-many must create, I mean, for any sort of relationship, you have to have at least more than one table. But yes, it will always create that third table that hosts the IDs of both of your models. Your unique IDs will always create that third table. Nathan asks, when a model gets updated, how do we keep track of how often that model gets updated? What do you mean by model gets updated? You mean when we add something?
Whenever I like your like or your post gets updated, you change something in it or interact with it. Does it keep is updated at just a single timestamp that just overwrites itself, or is that something like Facebook will actually count and say, oh, hey, this person's updating every 5 minutes or whatever?
Nope. So this is a great question. Way to point this out. These are all the attributes of every instance of this model. In the same way how we had classes, right? And I created Chuck and I created Marley. Those were two instances of my dog class. So every time a post is created, right? This created at and updated at are going to be the same time period. Then when I go in and I edit my post, once I press submit, it will actually update by default. In Django, it'll automatically do it for us. It will update that updated at time and put a timestamp. Once it's saved to the database, it will put a timestamp of the most recent save, basically. Most recent update, I guess you could say. So by default, we'll have the new time there for that specific instance. If I were to go to post, with the ID 3, the third ever post on Facebook, it will have it created at and an updated at. They might be the same time. But let's say somebody went in and added a picture or something like that. Well, then this time, once you press save and it saves this and that saves that instance on my database, it will create a timestamp here at my updated at and put that current time. Great question though. Almost deleted everything and I would have stressed out. Yeah, I almost did it again. I just did it. There we go.
So, for one user likes many posts, isn't it like a one-to-many relationship instead of like many-to-many?
So our one user can like many posts, but a post can be liked by many users. So this table, right? This like table right there has two one-to-many relationships towards it. A user can have many likes, but a like can only be associated to one user, right? And vice versa. A post can have many likes, but your like can only be associated to one user. But because it has two one-to-many posts pointing at each other, it actually creates a many-to-many between user and post from a like perspective.
Okay.
Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. Yes.
Okay.
I was just thinking about because it's a one post and like many can like the post, one post, and one user can post like many posts, right?
Mhm.
And also in one post has many likes. So I was just thinking if it's like many to many or just one to many. So I was just kind of confused in between those two.
So it can actually, in this, I fully understand the confusion. It can be both.
Sorry
So-
about that.
No, I totally get it. And that's a great point. I'm really glad you brought this up. So in this scenario, my user to post relationship is still a one-to-many. A post can still have only one user who created it. When you introduce likes, my likes creates a many-to-many relationship to the like table. Many users can like many posts, right? A user can like many posts and a post can have many likes. But that doesn't change the fact that this relationship here is still a one-to-many. So you can see that there are multiple relationships going on in this database.
Makes sense now. Like, thank you so much, Will.
Yeah, of course. It is. It's hard to grasp at the beginning. I promise as we start building out code, we will.
Hey,
It'll
Will,
start-
does it go like vice versa?
I'm
Like a
sorry?
user can, like the way we have like a user can have, one user can have so many like, and let me see if that's true. A like can be liked by so many users, right?
Yeah, a user can have many likes, but a like can, like, if you think of an instance of a like, that
Mhm.
is only associated to one user, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But a post can have many instances of a like. So many users can like a post,
Mm-hmm.
but the instance when a like is created. So let's say I go and I create a post, right?
Mhm.
I have an ID of 1. My post is 3. Let's say Mel was like, wow, that slaps. I'm going to go like it. She likes it. Once that like happens, it creates in my database an instance of a like, right?
Mhm.
It's an ID. What we're saying here is, well, Mel can be associated with many likes in my database,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And an instance of a like, but an instance of a like can only be associated with one post, but a post can also have many instances of likes. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say I go viral
Mhm.
and a lot of people start liking it. What this will do, I'm just going to do this right here, right? Say this. When that like button is smashed, if you've ever been on YouTube, you've probably heard that a million times, right? That like button is smashed. It's going to create an instance of my like that looks like this. Maybe it's an ID of 4. It's going to have a post ID of, we said that it was 3, right? Because that's what we set up there. That's what, looking at my ID. So it's that specific post, but let's say the user is, let's say Mel was the second person. I'm just saying this for, and then we have like our CA and updated at, right? Now, somebody else likes it. It's going to have an ID of 5. Post ID is going to be the same, right? It's the same post. But let's say Melissa likes it. Maybe she's user 15.
Mm.
Then let's say, oops, sorry. And let's say again, it goes viral. ID of 679. That's how many likes here with the post ID is still 3. And then the user ID, let's say, is 56. It's got created at and then an updated at. So all of these instances are being created every time a like is happening. They all share the same data in the sense of they're all a post ID of 3, right? But the user ID themselves changes because it is a way we can identify the different user that likes my post. Daniel asked, does CA need to be created at? Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to be quicker, but these created at and updated at up here are the way to do it. That's how you would do it. Does that make sense, Frank? So all of these, they all have the same thing associated, that they're all instances that have the same post ID, but my different users, but it varies on users. So one is Melissa, one is Mel, another is Mark, but they all liked my post. So when it creates that instance, it generates a new ID in my database. It still has this post ID, has a different user ID, which is my unique identifier to my user who is logged in. And then it has a created at and an updated at.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Perfect. Yeah, only people with M's. Yeah, yes. Sorry, Nathan. You can like my post too if you want. SEO at work. John asked, just from a modeling understanding, this is all in a single database but multiple tables within. Yes. So that's what a non-relational database is. It's all within the same database. It's a great point. But every model, it represents its own table. So this is a user table. We'll have a post table and a like table. I'm not saying that this might be the case, but for a black belt, you might have to do some sort of likes. Depends on which exam we decide to give. But this idea of a like might be something that will present itself when it comes to the belt exam. So Tiana said that in the reading, I think it was emphasized that the model name has to be plural and lowercase. Is that true? Let's go look. So when we do Django, you will have, when you create a model, kind of confusing because when you create a model, it will be uppercase and it will be singular in the same way we did with cases. So do you remember where it said that? It could be part of the SQL language. ERD lessons. Reminder that the MySQL and SQL is its own, right here, is its own language. So maybe from that language, now when we go to Django, it does write that for us. All lowercase, make it plural. Fascinating. So maybe in your actual SQL language, you will have, yep, I can see it right here. Make the table name plural and all lowercases. Make plural users, leads, sites. So maybe if you're actually building out your MySQL model, then it looks like, yes, in the SQL language, it will have it as a lowercase and a plural. So let me go ahead and change that. Thanks for pointing that out. In Django, we will be, no, not that one. In Django, we will be doing singular. We will be doing singular and uppercase. So great point out. So when we do things in the ORM or in Ruby on Rails, it becomes extremely important. So for our Django ORM, we will actually use uppercase. Fascinating. Oh, weird. I don't know why it says that. So Ruby on Rails, I don't know Ruby on Rails, but when we do Django, so if we were to go to Django and we go to our model, see, you would do a, oh, that's our movie. Yeah. You will have a, this is our model, and you will have a singular and a uppercase. That's how we create our classes, which is our model in our database. So you can see here, this is just a sneak peek, not necessary. You don't need it. Oh, you can't even look. You're not looking at my screen. Sorry, I forgot I was sharing. You share. Just up one. So if we're looking here, this is what it will look like if we're, okay, let's put this all together. This is what it's going to look like when we actually are creating our models in Django. You will create this class movie, right? And you can kind of think about it the way we did user. And then you're going to put your attributes. We're declaring, hey, create a table within my database that has an attribute of title, an attribute of description, attribute of release date, attribute of duration, a created at and an updated at. Notice we don't put ID because it does that for us. But then, and we'll get to this when we get to Django, but then we just define, well, what kind can you expect? What sort of data type can you expect? Or yeah, data type can you expect? This is you should expect date and time. This is, you should expect a number. This char field is basically a string, just a string that has a limitation. So it can only have 45 characters. Text field, there is no limitation, so they can write as much as they want. And then your created at and updated at will have a date time field. So this is what it will look like when it gets to Django. So I'm really interested in why that has that, because this is how we will be writing it when we get to the actual Django models, which is next week. So be ready, friends. We are jumping in. Any questions on this stuff? On these relationships? And then a one-to-one. I think I just got rid of my whiteboard. Boo. Yeah, it got rid of it for me. One-to-one is just the same thing, right? So you can kind of think about a picture. So if we had a picture there, picture would have an ID, and one picture can be associated with one host. You're not necessarily going to need that for, you're not necessarily, you're not going to need that for the exam. Things we will be grading you on are your one-to-many and your many-to-many. But one-to-one would be that, right? If you had a post and you wanted to have a picture, you would actually have a table for your picture, maybe, and then that would be a one-to-one, where this picture can have one. I guess now with Facebook, think back in the old days, we could only post one picture. Like, I guess Instagram now you can do a whole collage, so that's still one-to-many. But let's go back in days when you could just post one picture. It would be a one-to-one relationship. One post can have one picture. Now you can do a collage, so it'd be, one post can have many pictures, but that's what a one-to-one relationship would be. Nathan asked, Django is a relational or non-relational? So we will be using a relational database for Django. MERN is where we dive into the non-relational database, which is our MongoDB. Any questions on this? That is all I have for today. So,
I think this was mentioned before, but just to clarify, you do have to have at least a table of a table of a table in order to have a many-to-many.
so
Like
what will
you have to
actually
have a grandchild.
Yeah,
essentially.
well, it's not. So I wouldn't think about it as children because they do operate
Independently.
So I wouldn't think about it that way. But when you have a many-to-many, it will by default generate a third table in the same way that we just had like. Yeah. In order for that like to happen, it did generate a third table. Now, when we get to, without at all trying to confuse you guys in any stretch of the imagination, just to kind of, so you don't stress about it. When we get to that aspect in Django, we simply just say, we will have these two models. So books and authors, right? And in this example, a book can have one author, but an author can write many books, right? And so all you will do is you will say this models.foreign key, and that tells Django and its database there's a one-to-many relationship for book with author. Great. Then when we get to many-to-many, this is a couple weeks away, so don't worry about it. Then you're going to say many-to-many field, and it will by default create this third table to store that information, this book ID and this publisher ID. That makes sense? And you can see that it's a one-to-many from books and publishers. Two books has publishers. That stores the book ID and the publisher ID. So yes, when you have a many-to-many, you will have that third table. Django is not another database. Django is actually the framework we're going to use for Python. That is the entire framework we're using. And that's what we're going to start with next week. Any other questions, friends? Again, I really just want to reiterate, if you don't download MySQL or you're having issues, don't stress about that. Focus on this one-to-one, not really even one-to-one, but this one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, have understandings of those. Looking at likes, that's what we went through today. This is a great video, just kind of talking about how they all intertwine. And then for your assignments, you've got dojos and ninjas. This is for next week. So if you want to work ahead, go for it. But you got dojos and ninjas. All you need to do is create basically what I did today. Have a whiteboard or something of that nature. And create that. Take a screenshot and you're good to go. Mark asked if we don't use MySQL, you mentioned whiteboard. Is that a program? Actually, if you just go to, if you're just in Zoom, you can create a Zoom by yourself and then do share screen. One of the options is just a whiteboard. That's what I used. So there is no other, I'm sure, I know that there are other applications that if you want to use a whiteboard, like an online whiteboard, sure, but Zoom does the same thing. So you'll just run Zoom, be in your own classroom, build it out, take a screenshot, send it there. Tiana asked, do you grade the assignments or do we just do code reviews if we want feedback? So I don't grade every assignment. I sporadically go through assignments and just make sure people are doing the things correctly. I would say that if you want feedback, a code review is the most efficient way. Just as a reminder, if you want to do that, all you'll do is, you guys are still seeing my screen. You'll come here, go to the small group code reviews, and then you can click on any topic you either want feedback on, see if there's anything that we can refactor to be a little bit more efficient. Or if you just want to, discuss a topic, you can do object-oriented programming, the fundamentals, Django ORM, anything you need. You'll just click this, put a time that works best for you. So maybe tomorrow at 12 p.m. If you click confirm, it will go to one of our instructors, might be myself, might be, another instructor. There's quite a few Python instructors right now. One of us will help you walk through that stuff and grade your code. So as your reminder, oh yeah. So Irvin, yeah. So this week, your only 2 assignments are the stuff in the users with bank accounts. And from here, we're just looking at our assignment checklist. What we just went over is next week's stuff. Right here, this dojos and ninjas. So please make sure that you, that's the only one for next week is MySQL ERDs. So make sure you are catching up. You have plenty of time this week and next week. These are going to be your 2 easiest weeks of understanding OOP and jumping into your ERDs for next week. If I were you, I would actually just work ahead and go ahead and start working there, right? Start working to, oh, this is Thursday of week 2. So this is this week. Sorry, you do have 3 this week. Sorry, I was very confused. This square thing actually is very confusing. Sorry, guys. I was just wondering in my head, I was like, what am I teaching on next week? This is very confusing. So this week you have 3 actually. I'm so sorry about that. You've got that gray line threw me off too, John. I was like, oh, that's next week. I literally thought next week, what am I going to teach on? I just was panning through that in my head. So this week you do have 3 core assignments. You have bank account, users with bank accounts, and dojos and ninjas. Okay. This is week 3. So noting here, next week we will be starting Django. We will be starting Django. So I will really encourage you to dive into Django, do this first Django project. Do this first Django project before we meet on Monday, because we want you to make sure everything is downloaded, everything is good. As a reminder, we will be working fully in our environments. So practice opening your environment every single time. If you don't open your environment, you're not going to be able to run Django. Do not globally install it. Make sure it's installed in your environment. Kiana asked that it says Thursday. Yeah, you always have until Sunday night to do your assignments. Mark asked, if you had limited time, in your opinion, would you say the optional assignments from week 1 or week 2 were more important? So if I'm looking at week 1, I would definitely say week 2. Understanding OOP is really important. And this idea of TDD, test-driven development, is a great tool to do. It's just being able to write tests. So as you develop stuff, you can write tests to kind of stress test and see how your application's running. It's a great thing for actually in the industry. It's a really important thing. Tiana, I think that's a great thing. That's always what I suggest. Read ahead, kind of work ahead if you can. Today's a fairly light week. So if, I know a lot of you guys were doing user and bank accounts on Monday. So like I just showed you, dojos and ninjas, you just build an ERD. Doesn't take that long to do that. As long as you have the same right, pitchforks and everything like that. Then I would, if I were you, I'd really encourage you, really encourage you by next Monday to have this first Django project done. Have it done. Cool. So just as a refresher, if you are working on your environment, it's on the platform, you navigate to that specific virtual environment. And then you run, depending on whatever code you're in, you run this. As long as you're within your environment, you run the environment name, then activate. And then if you're Mac, you say source. And then depending on what you're using, if you're using Git Bash, you can say source, scripts, activate. So it just depends. And I believe Nathan put something here too. Yeah, he linked this. So you, Jordan, you can just come here and run that. Any questions, my friends? If not, we are good for tonight. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Just to kind of jump back to the user and bank assignment, we don't have to submit the bonus, right?
No, that's just a bonus.
Okay. Is there actually points associated with that, or it's just like, hey, good job, you did that?
No, it's more of a, hey, good job, you did that. The idea is if you're going for a black belt, so there's 3 different types of belts in Python. I know they did this in orientation, but we have an orange belt, a red belt, and a black belt. The idea is if you can do the sensei stuff and you challenge yourself to do the sensei stuff and you can figure that out, that will wildly help you understand stuff for black belt. And so it's basically, it's up to you. It's a little bit more challenging, but it is black belt sort of material.
Okay. I've been working on the sensei part since Monday. I've got the rest of it kind of figured out. Is it better just to turn in what I've got without the bonus and just keep going on the, okay.
Yeah,
I'll do that.
Absolutely. Make sure you turn in what you have by Sunday, and then you can keep working on that bonus. And if you get to a point where you're like, I've worked on this for an hour and a half, 2 hours, make a code review. Definitely do a code review, and then we can walk through that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions, my friends?
So, Will, when we were talking Monday with the bank accounts thing, and when we were trying to figure that, would that make more sense to be implemented using a database and instead of trying to build it into the class like we were doing?
100% yes. You would build that in a database. Well, everything we just did, you would have as a database. You'd have a bank account, you would have all that. It's just the idea of trying to introduce you to object-oriented programming before we jump into databases. But yes, 100%. And you would have some, like when we get to Django, we'll be able to run functions. We'll be able to, grab the specific bank account, the specific savings account, run this function, spit back.
So we could still have a set of quote unquote bank account functions, but pull a variable from the database and then run that function against that variable to apply it to that specific account. Yeah.
So we'll run something. So let's say it was a savings account, right? We would run, let's say we had a model in our database called savings. So we'd run something like savings.objects.get, where the ID matches whatever ID, right, of the user, that whoever's in session, again, kind of down the line. But if we know what user, right, we can get the savings for this user, then we pass it to this function, and this function does something. So it deletes or subtracts 20 and adds 20 to, runs another function that adds 20 to, whoever, Joe Schmo. And then you would redirect to a page basically that says, transaction successful, something like that. Yeah, you would absolutely do that with a database.
Okay. Now, just so I understand too, as we're going through Django and all this stuff, are we going to have to revert back to like build the page that takes these inputs?
Yes.
So, okay. So go brush up on HTML and CSS.
Yeah, so the CSS is not necessarily that big of a deal. What I would encourage, if instead of doing that, just learn some sort of quick bootstrap. But all you'll really need to do, the main thing that you'll need to do is know like an H1 and a form. As long as you do that, which we're going to go through as well, like I'll be building that out. You're not going to necessarily need to style it in any sort of way. And maybe what I'll do, I don't remember what day we're doing forms.
Okay, because like I didn't make it to Bootstrap in that first section, so I didn't know if I should go back and do that or not.
Yeah, no, I would say, so the first one, we're going to talk about routing, templates and static files. And the next one, we'll talk about session. And then we get into ORM and forms. So what I'll do is next week, one of our office hours, I'll actually just do a breakout session on Bootstrap. So that way, you can just transfer that. It's very simple, very, very easy concept to kind of comprehend. It's just columns. Bootstrap basically makes 12 columns across, and you say, hey, I want this to take up 3 out of the 12, and it does that. So I'll do that, but I wouldn't worry. I mean, at the end of the day, if you created a form that just had a label and an input tag, and you used to use like a BR, that would be fine.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, if you don't know how to do like a form, then yeah, absolutely go brush that up. But you should be able to.
So Bootstrap having form like already made, you could just get it there. Could you use that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you already have, you know,
Right.
like you could either, there's a couple things you could do. You could build a snippet, right? That basically you just type form and then it brings up an entire form. Or you could just utilize Bootstrap, which is what we'll do. So that way you can, you know, get used to using Bootstrap. It's a great tool to use, great tool to understand. So yeah, actually I will do a breakout session on Bootstrap next week. Just that way we can all understand and you know, as I'm building it, I'll use Bootstrap as well. So as I'm, you know, I'm going to build a lot of stuff. So it's not going to be as much theory as it was today. Today's the most theory that we'll do. But then moving forward, we will definitely do stuff with Bootstrap. All right, friends. Well, if there's no other anything, I will stop the recording and we will be done for tonight. Thanks, guys. Erica, if you could actually stay on, that would be awesome.